Welcome to Books and More, the channel where we explore powerful ideas that inspire growth, confidence, and a better future. In today's episode, we dive into Rich Dad, Poor Dad for Teens, a remarkable guide that reveals how money really works and why financial intelligence matters more than ever. Through real stories and simple lessons from Rich Dad, this book helps young people understand assets, cash flow, opportunity, and the mindset needed for financial freedom. If you're ready to think differently about money and take control of your future, this is the perfect place to start. Let's jump in. Introduction. From the very first pages, I want you to understand that your path toward financial freedom begins at this very moment with the decision to seek the kind of knowledge that schools and even families often cannot provide. Growing up, I learned that most of us are taught to study hard, get into a good college, find a stable job, and work diligently to succeed. But life quickly showed me that these traditional principles are becoming outdated. Many highly educated people work hard all their lives, yet still struggle with money, while others with little formal education grow wealthy because they understand how money truly works. The difference lies in financial education, something schools almost never teach. I was fortunate to have two fathers, one well-educated, honest, and dedicated, but constantly troubled by money. The other, who never finished 8th grade, possessed the mindset, habits, and knowledge of a wealthy man. One told me money is not important, while the other taught me money is power. One encouraged me to study hard to become a good employee. The other showed me how to become an owner. These contrasting viewpoints helped me realize there is more than one path to success. And in today's world, financial success requires a different kind of intelligence, financial intelligence. I wrote this book to share what my rich dad taught me since I was 9. While school taught me how to read, write, memorize, and take tests, Rich Dad taught me how to observe, think, overcome fear, and make money work for me. He helped me understand that emotions drive most financial decisions: fear of losing money, desire for more, complacency, or lack of confidence. And only when we learn to recognize and manage those emotions can our minds guide us to opportunities others cannot see. You may feel that what you learned in school hasn't truly prepared you for the real world, that you struggle to manage money, that you want more but don't know where to begin. I once felt the same. Watching friends who grew up wealthy think differently and act differently with money made me question what I wasn't being taught. That curiosity led me to seek answers, and the journey began when Rich Dad agreed to mentor me. In this introduction, I want you to understand that financial intelligence isn't just about money. It's about freedom. The freedom to choose how you live, to stop worrying about bills, to support the people you love, and to pursue greater opportunities. Whether you excel academically or not, whether you come from wealth or not, you can develop financial intelligence. It is never too early or too late to start. I wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad for young people, those who understand that their future cannot rely solely on school promises or job security. This book provides a new language, a new perspective, and the foundational principles I learned throughout my life. If you're open-minded, curious, and willing to step beyond your comfort zone, this book will give you a powerful start on your financial journey. My hope is that by the time you finish, you will not only understand how money works, but also know how to begin building your own rich future. Chapter 1. Financial Intelligence: A New Way of Learning. In this first chapter, I want you to understand that every person is born with their own unique kind of intelligence. My real dad always said that no child is ever truly not smart. They simply haven't found the learning style that fits them. When I was younger, I struggled in school. I didn't get the highest grades, and for a long time I thought something was wrong with me. But eventually I realized the problem wasn't my ability, it was the way I learned. Schools often value memorization, tests, and sitting still, while real intelligence comes in many forms: creativity, logic, communication, emotional awareness, problem solving, and more. As I grew older and financial thinking entered my life, I discovered that success, especially financial success, doesn't depend on grades. It depends on understanding how the real world works. Financial intelligence isn't taught through textbooks, it's learned through observation, practice, and experience. It begins with asking questions like why and how, and daring to think outside the boundaries that school often sets for us. Money has its own language, and to succeed, you must learn to speak that language. Throughout life, I've met many adults who are highly educated but financially lost. They know formulas, theories, and academic concepts, yet they fear debt, struggle with budgeting, or feel overwhelmed when faced with investment decisions. They're well trained for exams but not prepared for the financial realities of adulthood. That's why understanding financial intelligence early is such a powerful advantage. It teaches you how to think for yourself rather than simply follow instructions. In this chapter, I explain that one of your most important tasks is to figure out how you learn best. Some people learn by reading, others by watching, others by trying things for themselves. Once you understand your learning style, you unlock your ability to grow, not just academically, but financially. Rich Dad used to say, a genius isn't someone who knows everything. A genius is someone who knows how to use what they already have. And I believe that's true. Real financial intelligence begins with understanding your strengths and using them to see opportunities others miss. I also encourage you to start keeping a personal financial journal. Writing is one of the best tools for building self-awareness. When you write down your goals, your fears, and your observations about money, you begin to understand yourself more deeply. It's in those quiet moments of reflection that your financial mind starts to sharpen. Your journal doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to be honest. Over time, it becomes your personal roadmap. Another key idea in this chapter is the power of belief. If you believe you can't be rich, your mind shuts down. But when you ask yourself, how can I become rich? Your brain begins to search for possibilities. Rich Dad taught me that the mind grows stronger every time it's challenged. When you let your intellect lead instead of your fear, you open the door to creativity, problem solving, and opportunity. This chapter lays the groundwork for everything to come. Financial intelligence doesn't begin with money, it begins with mindset. It grows through curiosity, discipline, and the courage to think differently. You don't need to be born into wealth to become wealthy. You just need to learn how money works, how you work, and how to let your intelligence guide your financial decisions. Once you understand that, your journey toward financial freedom truly begins. Chapter 2. The Money Secrets of Rich Dad. New Principles for Making Money. In this chapter, I want you to understand that the financial world has changed, and the old rules no longer guarantee security or success. When I was young, I was taught, like most people, that if I studied hard, got a stable job, and worked faithfully, I would have a good life. But as I grew older, I saw something different. Many hardworking, educated people were still struggling financially, while others with far less schooling were thriving. It became clear to me that wealth is not created by grades or job titles, but by understanding how money truly works, something schools rarely teach. I was fortunate to grow up with two fathers, a well-educated, hard-working man who believed in traditional security, and Rich Dad who had little formal education but possessed deep financial wisdom. One taught me to value stability, the other taught me to chase opportunity. One believed money was dangerous, the other believed money was a tool. Their contrasting views helped me see that the path to wealth begins with choosing the right mindset. Rich Dad explained that most people spend their entire lives working for money. They trade hours for dollars and believe that the only way to earn more is to work harder or longer. But this path leads to exhaustion, not freedom. People become trapped by fear, the fear of not having enough, the fear of losing their job, the fear of falling behind. Fear forces them into a cycle of dependence. They work to earn money, then use that money to pay bills, debts, and expenses, leaving nothing left for building wealth. Rich Dad wanted me to understand that the truly wealthy see money differently. They focus on creating systems that generate income without requiring their constant labor. Instead of thinking, how can I earn more, they ask, how can I make money work for me? This shift in mindset is the foundation of financial intelligence. One story from this chapter highlights the moment when Mike and I tried to make money by melting toothpaste tubes and molding our own coins. While childish, the attempt revealed something important. Even at a young age, we were trying to solve problems creatively. Rich Dad didn't laugh or scold us. He saw the spark of entrepreneurial thinking. He explained that wealth comes from imagination and initiative, not just from labor. Rich Dad also taught us that opportunity is everywhere, but most people don't see it. Their focus is narrowed by routine and fear. To make money, you must train your mind to notice unmet needs, hidden inefficiencies, and overlooked possibilities. Wealthy people ask better questions and are willing to experiment, fail, and try again. They build teams and seek advice because they understand that no one becomes rich alone. This chapter emphasizes that becoming rich begins not with money, but with the decision to think like a rich person. You can choose to follow the path of fear, seeking stability and avoiding risk, or you can choose curiosity, creativity, and courage, the traits that allow you to recognize opportunities and act on them. Rich Dad believed that anyone, regardless of background, can learn to think this way. In the end, the lesson of Chapter 2 is simple but powerful. Your mindset decides your financial future. When you change the way you think about money, you change the opportunities you see, and those opportunities can transform your life. Chapter 3. Work to learn, not to earn. In this chapter, I want you to understand one of the most important lessons Rich Dad ever taught me. When you're young, you don't work to earn money, you work to learn. This idea may sound strange at first because most people grow up believing that the purpose of a job is simply to receive a paycheck. But Rich Dad showed me that if you only work for money, you'll spend your entire life being controlled by it. If you work to learn, however, you gain the skills and mindset that eventually allow you to make money work for you. When Mike and I began working at Rich Dad's store for 10 cents an hour, we quickly felt frustrated. The tasks were repetitive, boring, and seemed pointless. While friends spent weekends playing games, we were wiping shelves and sorting items. After a few weeks, I felt angry and convinced that Rich Dad was taking advantage of us. I marched into his office ready to quit, expecting sympathy. But he didn't apologize. Instead, he listened calmly and asked me a question that stopped me cold. Are you here for a lesson or a paycheck? Only then did I begin to understand his intention. Rich Dad used real-life situations, not lectures, to teach us how the world actually works. He knew that life hands you pressure, unfairness, and frustration without warning, and you must learn to think clearly through those emotions. Most adults let fear and disappointment dictate their decisions. They avoid risk, choose comfort, and cling to jobs they dislike simply because they fear losing a steady income. Rich Dad wanted us to face that fear early while we were young enough to learn from it. He explained that people who work only for money become trapped in what he called the rat race. They wake up, go to work, collect a paycheck, pay bills, and repeat the cycle until the end of their lives. Their fear of losing money forces them to chase it endlessly. But people who work to learn acquire new skills, broaden their perspective, and eventually build systems that generate money regardless of their job. The turning point came when Rich Dad challenged us to look beyond the tiny paycheck and start noticing opportunities. If you focus only on what you're being paid, he said, you'll miss the lessons that could make you wealthy. That message opened my eyes. Instead of counting coins, I began observing how the business worked, how inventory moved, what customers bought, how the manager handled problems. I started learning, not just working. Rich Dad also taught us that emotions are powerful forces in financial decisions. Fear of poverty drives people to cling to security. Greed pushes them into spending and chasing instant rewards. Those who become wealthy learn to recognize their emotions but not be controlled by them. They let logic guide their financial choices. That's why Rich Dad gave us low pay. A high wage would have dulled the discomfort that forced us to think creatively. This chapter shows that the most valuable things you gain from a job are not the dollars you earn, but the skills you acquire. Communication, management, creativity, problem solving, and the courage to see opportunities where others see routine. Rich Dad believed that learning is far more powerful than earning, because learning compounds. Money does not. By the end of the chapter, the message becomes clear. Don't chase paychecks, chase education. The right lessons today become the foundation of your financial freedom tomorrow. When you work to learn rather than to earn, you begin the transformation from an employee mindset to an entrepreneur's mindset, and that shift is the first true step toward wealth. Chapter 4. Money Works for Me. In this chapter, I want you to grasp one of the most powerful financial lessons Rich Dad ever taught me. The rich don't work for money, money works for them. This principle is more than a clever sentence. It is a completely different way of thinking about life, work, and opportunity. Once you understand it deeply, your entire financial future begins to change. Back when Mike and I were working for Rich Dad's small allowance, we eventually reached a breaking point. The pay was tiny, the work was dull, and it felt like we were getting nowhere. But this frustration was exactly the experience Rich Dad wanted us to face. He explained that most people go through life feeling the same frustration, yet they never question it. They simply accept the routine, wake up, work hard, collect a paycheck, pay bills, and start over again. The routine feels safe, but in truth, it becomes a trap. Rich Dad wanted us to see that money controls people because they never stop to understand how it works. They allow fear to push them into jobs they don't like and allow desire to push them into spending what they earn. This cycle keeps them dependent. If you want to escape that cycle, you must learn to think differently about money. You must learn how to put it to work. One morning in the store, I noticed a pile of old comic books thrown away by the manager. Instead of seeing trash, I saw potential. That simple moment turned into our first real business, a small comic book library where neighborhood kids could read as much as they wanted for a few cents. It was the first time money came to us without our direct labor. And Rich Dad smiled when he heard about it. We had finally taken the first step. We had let money work for us. Rich Dad explained that opportunities like these appear constantly in the real world. The problem is that most people are too focused on their paychecks to notice them. They think only about security, not creativity. But the wealthy train their minds to look for systems, assets, and opportunities that create income. They know that real wealth isn't built by working harder. It's built by building structures that generate money even when they're not present. This chapter also stresses the importance of understanding assets versus liabilities. Rich Dad taught us that an asset puts money in your pocket, while a liability takes money out. Most people accumulate liabilities believing they are assets: cars, houses, gadgets, and lifestyle purchases. Meanwhile, the wealthy accumulate true assets: rental properties, investments, intellectual property, and business systems. These assets are what allow money to work for them day and night. As you listen to this chapter, I want you to understand that you don't need to start big. You just need to start with awareness. Start by observing where money flows, how people spend, and what problems exist around you. Creativity and curiosity can lead you toward income streams that don't depend on a paycheck. The moment you stop thinking like an employee and start thinking like an owner, your financial life shifts. By the end of Chapter 4, the message becomes unmistakably clear. Money is a tool, not a master. When you learn how to build assets and systems, money begins working for you instead of you working for it. And once you experience even a small taste of that freedom, you will never see money the same way again. Chapter 5. Making Money. In this chapter, I want you to understand that making money is not some mysterious talent reserved for a few lucky people. It is a skill, one you can learn, practice, and grow if you are willing to think creatively and take action. When I was young, I also believed that the only way to become wealthy was to work harder and earn more. But Rich Dad showed me another truth. Money doesn't flow to the hardest workers. It flows to those who can see opportunities and transform them into value. Mike and I began learning this lesson early through small, almost playful attempts to make money. We didn't have capital or experience, but we had curiosity. When we created our little comic book library from old comic books that the store threw away, we learned our first real lesson in entrepreneurship. Money can be created when you solve a problem or meet a need. We didn't invent comic books, we simply found a way to make them accessible and affordable for kids in our neighborhood. That tiny idea taught us more about money than any classroom ever could. Rich Dad reinforced the idea that most people misunderstand how money is made. They think money comes from a job, a paycheck, or luck. But real money is created from ideas, from seeing what others don't see, from noticing opportunities hiding in plain sight. The majority of people limit themselves because they wait for the right moment, the right amount of money, or the right opportunity, never realizing that opportunities usually start small and often look ordinary. Wealthy people act on simple ideas. They don't wait for perfect ones. This chapter also explains the role of resourcefulness. You don't need money to make money. You need creativity, observation, and the willingness to start. Rich Dad always said, if you think you can make money only when you have money, you'll never start. When you learn to create opportunity from little or nothing, you develop one of the most powerful financial skills of all, independence. Another key topic of this chapter is the emotional side of making money. Two obstacles often hold people back: fear and laziness. Fear makes you worry about losing money or failing, while laziness convinces you that you don't have enough time, energy, or ability. Rich Dad taught me that these emotions block financial intelligence. When you silence them, even just long enough to take one step, you discover that creating money is far less scary than it seems. Rich Dad also reminded us that making money is about understanding value. People do not pay for products, they pay for solutions. They pay for convenience, comfort, entertainment, or time saved. When you understand what people value, even the simplest idea can become a money-making opportunity. That's why he encouraged us to observe the world constantly, to watch how people behave, what they complain about, and what they try to avoid. Those observations are the seeds of business ideas. By the end of Chapter 5, the message becomes clear. Making money is not about having money, it's about learning how to see. When you train your mind to spot opportunity, when you let your curiosity guide you, and when you take action instead of waiting, you begin to build the mindset of a creator, not a consumer. That mindset is the foundation of wealth. And once you develop it, you will start seeing opportunities everywhere, in everyday life, just like Rich Dad taught me. Chapter 6. It's all in the cash flow. In this chapter, I want you to understand one of the most important concepts in the entire world of finance: cash flow. Rich Dad repeated this lesson to me throughout my childhood because he knew it was the foundation of lasting wealth. Cash flow is the movement of money, how it enters your life, how it leaves, and how well you control that process. The difference between the rich, the middle class, and the poor is not how much money they make, but how they manage their cash flow. Rich Dad explained that poor people get trapped in a simple but painful cycle. They work, earn money, spend it on basic needs, and end the month with nothing left. Then they repeat the cycle again. It doesn't matter if their salary increases, if their habits stay the same, the outcome never changes. The middle class follows a similar pattern, but with a twist. As their income grows, they buy more things they believe are assets: a nicer car, a bigger house, new gadgets. But in reality, these purchases often cost them money every single month. Instead of building wealth, they build obligations. The wealthy think differently. They focus on acquiring assets that put money in their pockets, not take money out. Assets like rental properties, investments, royalties, and business systems grow their income even when they aren't working. Rich Dad stressed that the secret to financial freedom is simple. Build enough assets so that your cash flow covers your expenses. When your money works harder than you do, you become truly free. One of the most transformative lessons from this chapter is learning to distinguish between active income and passive income. Active income comes from your labor. It disappears when you stop working. Passive income comes from your assets. It continues even when you're asleep. Most people spend their entire lives relying only on active income, which keeps them stuck in the cycle of work. Rich Dad wanted us to break free from that dependency by building passive income early in life. As a young student, I didn't fully understand this at first. But Rich Dad used real examples, from small businesses to rental units, to help Mike and me see how cash flow works in practice. He taught us to examine the numbers, to look for patterns, and to understand why some people thrive while others struggle. The world is full of opportunities if you train your eyes to see them. But you can only take advantage of those opportunities when you understand cash flow. Another key message of this chapter is that managing cash flow requires discipline. It is easy to buy things that look impressive but drain your wallet. It is harder to invest in something that may take time to grow. That's why most people stay stuck. Rich Dad encouraged us to always ask, does this put money into my pocket or take money out? That one simple question can change your financial life forever. Rich Dad also emphasized that cash flow analysis isn't just for businesses, it applies to your personal life too. Your allowance, your part-time jobs, your spending habits, all of these reflect your personal cash flow. If you learn to control it while you're young, you will have a powerful advantage as an adult. By the end of this chapter, the lesson becomes clear. Wealth is built through cash flow, not through paychecks. When you learn to create, manage, and grow your own streams of income, you take control of your future. Cash flow gives you choices, it gives you freedom, and it allows you to build a life based on what you want, not what your paycheck forces you to accept. Chapter 7. Learning Through Play. In this chapter, I want you to understand a lesson that may sound simple, yet it is one of the most powerful principles in learning about money. The best way to learn is to play. Schools often teach us that learning must be serious, structured, and filled with rules. We sit still, memorize facts, and try not to make mistakes. But Rich Dad believed the opposite. He believed that play, experimenting, trying, failing, and trying again, is the fastest and most natural path to financial intelligence. When I was young, almost everything Mike and I learned about money came from games we created ourselves. Whether it was trying to make money by melting toothpaste tubes or building our small comic book library, those experiences taught us more about business, negotiation, and leadership than any classroom lecture ever could. Rich Dad encouraged us, not because the ideas were perfect, but because they allowed us to think, act, and discover. He knew that real understanding only comes when you put your hands in the work and experience the consequences, both good and bad. Adults often struggle financially not because they lack intelligence, but because they've forgotten how to play. They fear mistakes, they fear losing money, they fear being judged. This fear traps them into seeking only safety, stable jobs, predictable routines, and decisions that guarantee no failure. But wealth grows out of creativity and calculated risk, and creativity can only flourish when you're willing to play, explore, and try new things. Children excel at this naturally, which is why Rich Dad told me that young people have an enormous advantage in learning about money. In this chapter, I explain how Rich Dad used real-life games to teach us. He took us to business meetings, allowed us to witness negotiations, and encouraged us to observe how adults argue, compromise, and solve problems. These situations were not labeled as lessons, but they were some of the most valuable lessons I ever received. They taught me how the financial world truly operates, not how textbooks describe it. Rich Dad believed that money itself is a game, one with rules that most people never learn. They choose to play it safe, but the safe path often leads to lifelong financial struggle. Meanwhile, people who treat money like a game, curious, strategic, flexible, tend to succeed because they are not scared of the moves they must make. When one strategy fails, they simply try another. They don't freeze, they don't panic, they adapt. This chapter also emphasizes how important it is to keep learning fun. When learning becomes heavy or stressful, the mind resists. But when learning feels like a game, the mind opens. You think more clearly, more creatively, and more confidently. That's why Rich Dad never lectured us. Instead, he created situations that allowed us to learn naturally, situations that required us to observe, question, and experiment. By the end of Chapter 7, the message becomes unmistakably clear. To win the money game, you must learn the way a child learns, through curiosity, courage, and play. Money is not something you master by fear or memorization. It is something you master by participation. When you treat learning as a game, you not only grow faster, you grow without limits. And the more you play, the better you become at creating the financial future you want. Chapter 8. Money-Making Opportunities for Young People. In this chapter, I want you to understand that opportunities to make money are everywhere, sometimes right in front of you, but only those who train their minds to see them can take advantage of them. Rich Dad often told me that opportunity doesn't come from luck, it comes from awareness. And when you're young, you have one of the greatest advantages in life, the freedom to experiment, fail, learn, and try again without the heavy responsibilities that adults carry. Rich Dad believed that young people should never underestimate the power of small beginnings. You don't need a big business plan or a lot of money to start. What you need is the willingness to observe what people want, what problems exist around you, and how you can create value. As a kid, my earliest money-making ideas were simple, renting out comic books or helping neighbors with small tasks. And yet, those experiences taught me more about entrepreneurship than any school assignment ever did. They showed me how money flows when you provide a service that solves a problem. In this chapter, I emphasize that your personal interests can become the foundation of your first income. If you're good at math, you can tutor younger students. If you love animals, you can walk dogs or pet sit. If you enjoy gaming, you can create content or help others improve. Almost any passion can be transformed into a business if you approach it with creativity and purpose. Young people often overlook their talents because they think money must come from traditional jobs. But real money and real learning comes from using your strengths to serve others. Rich Dad also taught that the most valuable part of starting young isn't the money you earn, it's the experience. Every small venture teaches you something: how to communicate, how to handle customers, how to manage time, and how to think like someone responsible for results. These lessons build financial intelligence far faster than memorizing formulas or definitions. When you learn by doing, the lessons stay with you for life. A major theme in this chapter is developing the ability to recognize needs. People pay for solutions, they pay for convenience, they pay for anything that helps them save time, avoid stress, or feel better. If you can identify what people complain about, what frustrates them, or what they wish existed, you're standing right in front of an opportunity. Rich Dad trained me to pay attention to these details. He would walk with us around the neighborhood and ask, "What do you notice? What's missing here? What could be improved?" Those questions taught us to see the world through entrepreneurial eyes. Another crucial idea is that learning to make money early builds confidence. Once you realize you can create income on your own, you stop depending solely on others for opportunities. You learn to trust your ideas, you become more resilient, and that confidence becomes a powerful asset, one that can fuel your ambitions for years to come. By the end of this chapter, the message is clear. You don't need to wait to become an adult to start building your financial future. Opportunities are everywhere, waiting for you to notice them. When you combine curiosity with action, small beginnings can lead to big successes. And the earlier you start, the sooner you develop the financial intelligence that will guide you toward independence and freedom. Chapter 9: Managing Your Assets. In this chapter, I want you to understand a truth that separates the wealthy from everyone else. Being rich is not about how much money you earn. It is about how well you manage your assets. Rich Dad taught me early on that assets are the foundation of financial freedom. Unfortunately, most people spend their lives chasing income instead of building assets, and that single mistake keeps them trapped in financial stress. Rich Dad explained that an asset is anything that puts money into your pocket, while a liability takes money out. It sounds simple, but this idea is powerful because most people confuse liabilities with assets. They call the house they live in an asset, even though it costs them money every month. They call their car an asset, even though it constantly depreciates and demands maintenance. The middle class works hard to buy these liabilities, believing they are building wealth, but in reality, they are building monthly expenses. The wealthy do the opposite. They focus on collecting assets that generate cash flow: rental properties, businesses, intellectual property, and investments. They spend their lives building sources of income that don't depend on their labor. That is why Rich Dad insisted that Mike and I learn how to recognize, acquire, and maintain assets, even when we were very young. He knew that habits formed early become financial instincts later in life. In this chapter, I emphasize that building assets doesn't require you to be rich first. In fact, it works the other way around. You become rich because you start building assets early. When I was a kid, my assets were small: simple business ideas, tiny ventures, and savings from odd jobs. But what mattered wasn't the amount, it was the mindset. Each small step taught me how money moves, how value is created, and how important it is to track what you own. Assets grow when your financial intelligence grows. Rich Dad also taught me that assets must be managed, not ignored. Wealthy people pay close attention to the performance of their investments. They know what's working and what isn't. They adjust, refine, and build systems. They keep records, study their numbers, and make decisions based on facts rather than emotion. Poor money managers, on the other hand, avoid looking at their finances because they feel overwhelmed. But avoidance is what leads to financial collapse. Another important point in this chapter is the discipline required to prioritize your future over your impulses. Rich Dad believed strongly in the principle of pay yourself first. This doesn't mean indulging yourself, it means investing in your assets before spending on anything else. Even if money feels tight, setting aside something for your future forces you to think smarter, earn more creatively, and protect your long-term goals. This discipline is one of the most important habits of the rich. I also talk about how your skills can be assets. Your ability to write, teach, repair things, design, or solve problems, these are all assets that can generate income long before you invest in real estate or stocks. Rich Dad often reminded us that the greatest asset we have is our mind. When you invest in your knowledge, in your creativity, and in your abilities, every other asset becomes easier to build. By the end of Chapter 9, the message becomes clear. Financial freedom is a result of managing your assets wisely, not of earning a high income. When you learn to distinguish between assets and liabilities, when you cultivate the discipline to invest in your future, and when you consistently grow your financial intelligence, you build a foundation that will support you for the rest of your life. Assets are the key, not just to wealth, but to freedom. Chapter 10: Managing Debt. In this final chapter, I want you to understand a lesson that many adults discover far too late. Debt is not the enemy, mismanaged debt is. Rich Dad taught me that debt is a tool, and like any tool, it can either build your financial future or destroy it. The key is knowing the difference between good debt and bad debt and having the discipline to use debt wisely instead of emotionally. Growing up, I saw many people live in constant fear because of debt. They borrowed money to buy things they believed they needed, new cars, bigger homes, trendy gadgets, and then spent years working just to keep up with the payments. Their debt didn't make them richer, it made them dependent. This is what Rich Dad called bad debt, money borrowed to buy liabilities, things that take money out of your pocket every single month. When your life revolves around paying for liabilities, you become trapped in a cycle where losing your job means losing everything else too. Rich Dad, however, introduced me to a very different idea, good debt. Good debt is borrowed money used to acquire assets, things that generate income. For example, a loan used to purchase a rental property can be considered good debt if the rent covers the loan payments and still leaves you with profit. Debt used to start or grow a business that brings in more money than it costs is also good debt. Wealthy people use debt strategically to multiply their assets, expand their opportunities, and build financial freedom faster. But Rich Dad also warned that good debt requires financial intelligence. If you don't understand cash flow, interest rates, or risk, any debt can turn into bad debt. That's why he insisted that knowledge must come before borrowing. He said, if you can't explain clearly how a debt will make you money, you're not ready to take it on. Many people borrow emotionally, buying things to satisfy comfort or desire, rather than logically. That's how they end up overwhelmed and stressed. Another lesson in this chapter is learning to say no to unnecessary debt. Modern society encourages constant consumption. Advertisements tempt you into thinking you deserve the latest phone, the newest car, or a high-end lifestyle, even if you have to borrow to get it. Rich Dad taught me that discipline is more valuable than luxury. If you can't buy something without borrowing, you probably shouldn't buy it at all. Wealth builds on patience and smart choices, not on impulse. This chapter also explains practical strategies for escaping bad debt. Rich Dad taught me to pay off high-interest debts first, to avoid taking on new liabilities, and to focus on increasing my income through assets instead of working harder just to cover bills. He emphasized that building even a small stream of passive income can create the momentum needed to break free from the debt cycle. Every dollar earned from assets is a soldier working to protect your financial future. Ultimately, the message of this chapter is about control. You must control debt before debt controls you. Used wisely, debt becomes a powerful lever that accelerates your financial growth. Used carelessly, it becomes a weight that pulls you deeper into stress and limitation. Rich Dad believed that understanding debt is a crucial part of financial maturity. When you learn to distinguish between good and bad debt, act with discipline, and make decisions based on logic rather than emotion, you take a major step toward financial independence. By the end of Chapter 10, the lesson is clear. Debt is not something to fear, but something to master. And once you master it, you open the door to a future where money works for you, not the other way around. Conclusion: your first step toward financial freedom. In this conclusion, I want you to take a step back and look at the entire journey we've taken together. Everything in this book points to one central truth: financial freedom is not an accident, it is a choice. It begins with the decision to think differently, to question the old rules, and to take control of your financial future rather than letting the world decide it for you. If you've made it to this final chapter, it means you're ready to take that first step. Rich Dad always believed that the biggest difference between the rich and the poor is not money, it's mindset. Most people grow up being taught to follow a predictable path: study hard, get a job, work for security, and retire someday. But the world has changed. Job security is uncertain, the cost of living rises, and debt traps are everywhere. That's why financial intelligence is more important now than ever before. It gives you the power to navigate a world that doesn't always reward hard work, but always rewards smart thinking. Throughout this book, I've tried to share the lessons Rich Dad taught me. Lessons about money, fear, opportunity, assets, debt, and the power of learning through real-life experience. These lessons aren't meant to overwhelm you, they're meant to open your eyes. You don't need to be a financial genius to become wealthy. You just need to understand how money works and how you can put it to work for you. The moment you begin to see the world through this lens, your financial life starts to transform. The conclusion also highlights the advantage that young people have. When you're young, you have time, the most valuable resource anyone can possess. Time to learn, time to try, time to make mistakes and recover. You don't need to have everything figured out. You just need the courage to start. The small steps you take today, the simple habits you build, will compound into something powerful over the years. Wealth is rarely created overnight. It is built through consistent learning, smart choices, and disciplined action. Another important message in this chapter is that the path to financial freedom begins with knowing yourself. What kind of life do you want? What dreams do you have? How do you want to spend your time? Money is simply a tool that gives you choices. When you build financial intelligence, you're not chasing luxury, you're chasing freedom. Freedom to live your values, to support the people you love, and to pursue opportunities that excite you. Rich Dad taught me that mistakes are part of the journey. You will stumble, you will make wrong decisions, and you will feel lost at times. But every mistake contains a lesson that pushes you forward. The people who succeed financially are not the ones who never fail. They are the ones who learn quickly and keep going. If you adopt that mindset, you will always find your way back onto the path of progress. As we close this book, I hope you see it not as an ending, but as a beginning. A roadmap, a spark. The real journey starts now, with your next decision, your next action, your next idea. You have everything you need to begin building your own foundation of wealth, curiosity, courage, and the willingness to grow. The future of your financial life is in your hands. And if you keep learning, keep questioning, and keep building, you will create a future you can be proud of, one built on freedom, confidence, and opportunity.